Ooh, I just heard a little message, so I hope that our introductions were recorded. But just in case, we are here today talking about foundations and how a strong foundation start with Culinary School can help launch your career. We are with Jennifer Hill Booker and Greg Baxtrom, two incredible food professionals and part of the James Beard Network. We're really excited to talk to them today. A couple of housekeeping notes on how the webinar works. This webinar is being recorded, so by next week it will be available up with our past webinars and events page at openforgood.com, the sister website of jamesbeard.org. We will field all of your questions as time allows, so please write in those questions at any time using the webinar toolbar, which will probably be showing up on the right of your screen. And if you're having technical difficulties, please message us using the webinar toolbar, and we will do what we can to troubleshoot. At the very least, we'll be able to share a link with you of this once we have that ready to go. All right, let us get started. So Jennifer, Greg, thank you so much for joining us today. As a person who also graduated from Culinary School, I'm really, really thrilled to be having this conversation with you. I graduated from FCI in 2006. I was in a nighttime program. I had worked in restaurants before, and I just wanted to learn more and was really thrilled with that. But I am not a chef today, so I definitely used that and took a different path. And I think that there are so many different careers in the culinary arts, around the culinary arts, adjacent to the culinary arts that you can do with a culinary sort of background. But I think perhaps it might be good to get started with what people usually think culinary school is for, the chef of your own restaurant, owning a restaurant. Greg, would you like to tell us a little bit about what business life in Brooklyn has been like?
So not about school, about just sort of restaurants in general?
Well, I think a little bit about just what your restaurants are, just for our viewers who might not be familiar with sort of the scene that you're in Brooklyn, just so we have an idea of what kinds of places Olmsted and Maison Yaki are. I know all about them, of course, but I think our viewers might be from across the country.
Yeah, of course. Well, so basically where we're at, we have these two restaurants that are actually across the street from each other. One is Olmsted, and it's sort of more of a farm to table restaurant. You know, a guest once gave me a compliment and said that Olmsted to them reminds them if Blue Hill at Stone Barns and Alenia in Chicago both had a casual baby, that's what we would be. And that's kind of what we were going for. I mean, we were very environmentally conscious. We try to shop very carefully and thoughtfully. We try to be inexpensive as much as possible, as much as reasonable to our guests, so we can really be, you know, a fixture in the neighborhood. And then the restaurant across the street, same thing. There's a lot of agricultural elements to it. We grow our own mushrooms above the bar in this sort of mushroom box that we have. However, that restaurant's driven, it's more of a fusion, for lack of a better word. It's a French and Japanese. And you know, a year ago we were forced to close due to COVID, and we've been sort of clawing our way back. We quickly pivoted into being sort of a place to just get a meal. We became a food bank a week after we were forced to close, and we still work with different organizations like the Lee Initiative, World Central Kitchen, and Rethink to provide meals for those in need in exchange for sort of a small, modest revenue stream. We've turned our private dining room into a grocery store, and we're in 2 weeks we will officially reopen for indoor dining, and by then it'll be at 50% capacity. We have been allowed to reopen for indoor dining for a few weeks now. We sort of, you know, we are fortunate enough that we have outside space. So I don't think it's as easy of a decision as some other businesses that could, you know, just can't wait until they need to be able to do indoor dining. We have a big garden out back in both restaurants, and we have a lot of sidewalk seating in front of both restaurants. So what we did is we just gave everybody 8 weeks to get the vaccine once they became eligible for it. And fortunately, by the time we open in 2 weeks for indoor dining, the entire staff for both restaurants will have been vaccinated and have passed the 2 week post second shot date. Yeah.
That's That's great. Congratulations. That sounds like a very exciting development.
Thanks.
Awesome. And really wonderful. So anybody out there who's listening today, if you come and visit New York, you'll probably be going to Brooklyn. Brooklyn's a very popular place in New York City, but certainly check out Maison, Yaki, and Olmsted. They're wonderful spots. Our other panelist here with us today is Jennifer Hill-Booker. Jen, it's so good to have you back with us. You've been part of several of the webinars that we've been having over the past, and I cannot believe it has been a year since we've been in these crazy times of our lives. But you've been a part of several of our webinars, but you of course have a very thriving business in Atlanta, and I wonder if you might be able to tell us a little bit more about what your Resident Gourmet is all about.
Sure thing. And to Greg, congratulations, not just on the reopening, but just being so responsible in how you guys are dealing with COVID. So I give you two thumbs up for that. Sure. I'm here in Atlanta, and it's kind of fast and loose. So I do commend you on that. As far as what I've been up to, because yes, it has been a year of a lot of downtime, which may be why I've been available for so many panels. I don't know. But one thing that has come out of it, well, several things, but I'm currently working on 2 restaurant concepts in Northwest Arkansas and Springdale. So one is a German style beer garden, very casual, grab your beer, grab your brat, sit out, and, hang out, have a good time. And the other is called Revival, and it's initially it was a traditional dine-in restaurant, right? So we've had to shift that and pivot and change it more to a culinary center where you can dine in, you can grab and go, you can shop specialty items, you can take a class, but just very community forward. And that's due to open next year. Bauhaus is due to open this summer if we can get everything we need, right? But in the meantime, I've had some downtime to work on projects, and one of which was launching my spice line called Your Resident Gourmet Cooks. And I'm sure, Victoria, you and Greg both can attest to chefs tend to make our own spice blends of what we like to use. And so I've had a book of all these recipes, and so I had some time, and now I was able to get it packaged, labeled, and launched as e-commerce on my website. So that was cool. And my sister and I actually wrote a children's, I don't want to say cookbook, but a book that has a recipe in it. And it's based on our kids and spending summers in Charleston, Mississippi, which is where we're from and where we spend our summers. And it's called Jelly Fries a Fish for Dinner. And it's based on my daughter, Janelle, and my mom, and them catching fish and frying it. So that's been a lot of fun. And that just launched recently. So I'm pretty excited.
That sounds great.
Congrats.
And so interesting. I mean, one of the things that my time working with James Beard Foundation is that chefs sure do wear a lot of hats. And I think no matter what kind of business you own, if you have some kind of business in this culinary world, you end up doing a lot of different things, like turning into a grocer or a children's book author or whatever you need to do to kind of make that happen. But today we're talking about foundations, and Greg, you're absolutely right. We are here to talk about kind of what that foundation of Culinary School did to help you and to kind of put you on this path. And I think maybe, the first thing that I might ask, Greg, you're a graduate of Kendall College, of course, our presenter today. Jennifer, you had the opportunity to go to Le Cordon Bleu in France, in Paris. So kind of different experiences, but still, big cities, big restaurant cities, places where there's lots of different people are traveling to Chicago, different people are traveling to Paris. Culinary school is a big step for a lot of folks. What lessons are you still using today in your everyday, from a way that you approach an ingredient, or even just the way that you sort of approach this business? Are there any things that you can think of that you picked up in culinary school that you've taken with you? And how has that foundation, how did you start building that foundation, and what kind of blocks did you start with? And I'm happy to kind of jump in and just to get us moving. You know, one of the things that I learned in school, I went into culinary school thinking, oh, I'm a pretty good cook. I like to cook at home. I've worked in restaurants before in front of house. Like this was going to be easy. And then I realized that there are so many precise cuts and ways that you look at a vegetable, you look at something, and then there's a way to do that so you get the maximum amount of product from that. And that is something that I have used in my home cooking. It's something that I've used, you know, in various jobs. It's just being able to take that onion and cut it in the right way so that you get the most onion for your money. And onions seem like a silly thing, but in a restaurant, in a business, in a catering business, and whatever it might be, you know, onions, you're spending money on them. You want everybody to be able to cut that onion in the right way. It's that common language. I don't know who might want to jump in first, but what kinds of lessons did you take with you, and do you think you're still using today that you picked up in school?
Me?
Greg, you look super excited. I'm looking at you.
I was being a gentleman. I was letting you go first. I mean, for me, culinary school was all about. It was all about the foundation. I mean, I do think, you know, I am an advocate for culinary school if you're really gonna do a deep dive into it, because otherwise it's expensive. You know, like it's expensive, culinary school. But like I was the kind of person, literally, I was the person that would be watching Emerald in my dorm room while tourneing potatoes on my bed, on my lap, while the French Laundry cookbook was on my bed open up, and I was, you know, reading about knife cuts. Like I was just that guy. And I know that even in my new restaurant, I mean, Olmsted is just a culmination of my career everywhere I've worked, including culinary school. But in Maison Yaki, you can really see sort of the fundamentals of cooking, in that, like, culinary school was a French culinary school. It's not that we didn't learn about other cuisines and stuff like that, but it was French rooted. And so that restaurant has sauce Maltese and a hollandaise, and it has a Bordelaise sauce, and it has things that, like, I remember making those flashcards when I was in culinary school. You know, so that way I just thought I was going to be required to know all the mother sauces with all of their derivatives. So I just memorized them all. I mean, étouffée, like, it doesn't matter what it was and all this kind of stuff. Like I thought that was what I was supposed to do. And having that foundation, you know, 15 years later, you know, it's in my DNA now. You know, it's just such a strong, you know, foundation. The word you guys are using, foundation. And I attribute a lot to being able to make the best of, you know, that's how my parents raised me too, was to be, you know, take things seriously and give it your all or don't do it at all. And so there's that too. But all of my stages and internships that led into a good job, that led into a better job, like all of that came because I took as much as I could out of culinary school as possible. So yeah, culinary school.
Yeah,
Jen,
I would
what are
have
your
to
thoughts
agree.
there?
Sure, I would have to agree. And, you know, I think, as Greg has said, you have to look into this. Is it a career or is it a job that you use to pay the bills for other things you like to do? And there's nothing wrong with either answer. It's just a different approach. So people get very excited when I say, oh yeah, I went to culinary school in Paris, went to Le Cordon Bleu, and then I say, which I don't know if they always hear, my foundation was at a technical school, state school. So I got my undergrad, my bachelor's degree, and only because my parents, especially my father, were like not jazzed at all about me wanting to be a chef. And they were the first of either of their families to go to university and get a degree. And they went to University of Michigan, so go blue. And then, you know, they have their firstborn child and they have all these plans. And I'm like, I want to be a chef. And they're like, we don't really want that for you. And back then, you know, chefs were either white European men, right? Literally European men, or kind of your misfits or your washouts or your burnouts. It wasn't a respectable career that it is now so much. So we made a deal. I would graduate, get my undergrad, and then my dad, to quote him, and then I don't care what you do. And so I took him at his word and graduated in the spring, started culinary school in the fall. But the closest one to me and the one I could afford, because I was still paying off my bachelor's degree, was Oklahoma State University Institute of Technology. And so it was close, it was affordable, but it also had some amazing chef instructors. And they were from France. We had a Swiss instructor. We had a local instructor who did meat fabrication. We had some that had traveled, in the military as a cook. So it was a really super strong foundation. And then Le Cordon Bleu in Paris, years later of working in the industry, I call my finishing school, right? Because it really did hone in and polish that foundation I had. And Greg, they did expect you to know the mother sauce and all the derivatives. Like for them, that's just their language. So I think decide, yeah, right? So decide, is this a career? Because it's hard, it's a lot of work, and you'll do it forever, hopefully. Or is it just a job? And if it's your career, then approach it as such. Get the best education you can for what you can afford. It's ridiculous to pay $85,000 for a 2-year associate's degree. I'll just say it out loud. And then continue to educate yourself, right? Take classes, travel, eat out at other restaurants, see what they're doing. And all of that really helps to add and build on the foundation that you start with.
Do you think it's important to work in a restaurant before you start working or before you start attending culinary school? Or would you recommend that someone go into school with no bad habits, no background information, because I never cooked professionally before, but I worked in restaurants, so I felt like I knew the ecosystem of a restaurant. I understood kind of the way everything worked and how you fire tickets and how food comes out and what the different stations were. But I had never cooked professionally before, so I didn't have a lot of bad habits to be broken. But I have to say, I personally think it's important for anybody who's looking at this as a career to actually work in a restaurant and to pick whatever that busy season. If you're in Vail, work the ski season. If you're in Florida, work the summertime season and see what it's really, really like. Do you find that it's better for someone to be super green and to go in with no preconceived notions, no bad habits, no good habits? Or do you think it's better to have a bit more of a background before you start something like culinary school?
Well, I have taught as a chef instructor for culinary college, and I think it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other, with the understanding that it's going to be hard work and that culinary is a language, right? You're learning a language. So if you worked in the industry for a month or 10 years and you then decide to go to culinary school, you're coming in to learn more of this language. And if you're a vet in the industry, you have to be open to being trained in this language. And then if you're a newbie, you got to get in the industry and get a job, because otherwise you're still not learning that language. So if you're going to spend all that money on your career, if you haven't worked the industry, I would say you need to be working while in school. Ideally, you have some background in culinary arts, but I don't think you have to have it. But they have to be simultaneous, I think, if you haven't done it prior.
Craig, what do you think?
Well, I went straight from, Kendall was putting out an incentive that if you started culinary school in the summer, that there would be a discount. So like, that was just like me and my parents saying, okay, then you're starting in the summer. So, I just went straight from graduation to like a couple weeks later, I lived in Chicago. I moved from my parents' house and moved into the dorms. I think it's either path. You're going to have to come at it with some humility, and that, like, it's frustrating work, it's uncomfortable, and eventually it's not that it's not that there's Gordon Ramsay everywhere screaming at everyone, but just even in the best scenario, it's still long hours, the margins are small, you're standing literally on your feet doing, like, there's not a lot of break time. So if you're coming at it with the open eyes and trying to gain some understanding as to what you're getting yourself into, and like Jennifer said, I don't know, just gaining a perspective of what are the expectations going to be, what are you getting yourself into, what are you about to, what are you committing to? Because it is just like any other thing, any other profession, but it's a very hard profession, even from when I started out by working at Wendy's to see because that was the only place that would hire a 15-year-old kid was Wendy's, and that it was a restaurant, so I thought it was a win-win. To working at Per Se and all these fancy places, there's a huge difference in them, but there's also a lot of similarities in them too. You still get soaking wet in the dish pit every night, regardless of which one you're standing in. So it just
and really, no matter,
gotta want it. The passion's got to be there. The passion has got to be there. Even if you don't know, I always thought I just wanted some really fancy restaurant. But I don't have a fancy restaurant. The other ones that are on the horizon are not fancy, and but I knew that this is what I wanted to do. I knew that much. You got to have that part, I think, before you commit that kind of time and money and sacrifice. I mean, you're working every holiday. It's a big burden, honestly.
I think, one word that you mentioned particularly was humility. And I think that is so important. It's so easy to get lost in the cycle of chefs on TV and chefs with their own shows and chefs competing with each other and chefs winning $1 million and $100,000 in your own new restaurant. And it's really easy to think like, oh, well, I'll do this and then I'll do that. And then I'll have, it's the humility of it is that if you do walk into a restaurant and you're right out of culinary school, the reality is that you're probably going to get the entry level position. You're going to be starting with things that you did in your first week of culinary school, perhaps, and not right up on the saute station or right up, over on the grill. Most likely, you're going to have to get a little bit more experience actually on your feet first. So I think that humility is a big part of it.
I worked at Alinea for 4 years. The first 4 years it was open. For 6 months, I worked for free to then get the lowest on the, to be on the cold station and work my way up to being a sous chef. And even after being a sous chef at what was ranked #1 in the country, when I moved to work at Per Se, I still had to start in the Gourmet kitchen. It's just that's the humility. You just because you may know how to expedite from one place, or you might know how to do something from one place, it just, that's not how I want you to expedite here. So it's just it's you don't come at it as a know-it-all. You're a sponge and you're trying to absorb as much information from other people and get all of their failures, all their wins, understand them as much as possible along the way before you're ready to then. And not one time at Blue Hill Stone Barns or Per Se or Lenny did I try to put a dish on the menu, because I wasn't there to. What purpose does that serve? I'm there to get as many dishes out of these guys and skill sets why do they answer a question in that way? Why do they give this guy a day off and this other time they did? That was the stuff that was important to me, and trying to apply that to what I do now. Not that might be right or wrong. I don't know. That's just what I do.
Oh, but it is the reality though, and I think that's something that it can be hard to see that reality when you're getting through school, and then you make it, you graduate, you're like, oh, I'm hot stuff now, and it's like, oh no, just now, wait a second. All of a sudden now the training really begins. So Jennifer, let's go back to Paris. So you're in Paris. You're doing your Bordelaise sauce. You're all of the mother sauces. It's all happening. I can imagine that was. There was probably a lot of French people that were in those classes. Were there a lot of Americans? Were there a lot of women? Were there a lot of people like you that were in that class? And did you, was there anything that you felt that you needed to do to make sure that you were getting as much out of this opportunity as possible?
Sure. So, and I have to kind of chuckle because when Greg was talking, and you too, Victoria, about, oh, you graduate culinary school, you think you're hot stuff. And I was like, oh, never me. But I remember applying to Le Cordon Bleu and having a degree and having worked years in the industry. And they're like, well, you have to start with the base, you know, Basta cuisine course. And I'm like, no way. I've been out here. I know what I'm doing. I'm working. So back and forth to the point where they're like, either you start at the beginning or you don't come. And I was like, oh, well, okay. So I started at the beginning and that I was there a year, and every day it kicks my butt because what we do for cooking, we learn it, right? The classical French, they start, you know, from the breast, like it's like DNA in them. And so it's so much to have to learn while I'm there, and maybe even unlearn a couple things. And so I had taken French, you know, since 8th grade through college. So I was okay on that because we'd have demo and lecture one day for about 5 hours, all in French. And they had, I guess, a higher up student, like a grad student, and she would or he would translate. But I knew enough French to know they weren't translating everything the chef was doing and saying. So, and then the next day we had to recreate the entire meal that the chef had demoed the day before. And you had a partner and you had your own little station. So it was, I'd say maybe 50-50 Americans and other countries, and maybe 70-30 men to women. But by the end of the program, myself and one other American woman were the only women and the only Americans that finished the program. And it was because it was romanticized, right? Oh, look what I'm doing in Paris and I'll cook and it's so romantic. And it's like, no, this is a working culinary school. We're serious about what we do. We put chefs in these French restaurants y'all love. So it's the hard work. And my partner was Japanese. And so he spoke no English. I spoke no Japanese. So pointing and bowing and, you know, that type of thing. But it was excellent. I learned so much, not just while in school, but living in the culture of French cuisine and traveling Europe, because everywhere is a 5-hour train ride. So you just, you know, third class, if you don't have a couple, you know, a lot of bucks, it's a couple dollars, you get on the train and you go, you know, to Barcelona, or you go to Switzerland, or you go, you know, just wherever and see that food and that culture. And that to me is part of, you know, continuing education, which is building on that foundation again. So I'd say if I had everything I needed, I think it was the determination to go, because it was expensive and it was a sacrifice to be there and, you know, away from your family. But learning as much as I could and being humble to say, you know what, you're right. I don't know what you know, and I'm here to learn everything I possibly can while I'm here.
Totally. How important do you think the element of location is for culinary school? I mean, I went to school in New York City, a pretty good restaurant town, if I do say so. Paris, also a great restaurant city. Chicago is a great restaurant city. I feel like there's something special about going to school and then being able to go out and experience restaurants that you're maybe learning about that cuisine or you're learning about a technique. Do you think that that's important to be able to do those things in tandem while you're in school?
I was 18 and broke, so.
Not too much, you know. Well, I was living in Tulsa, Oklahoma at the time, which is the test hub for franchise restaurants. Like, what do they call? What do we call them now? Like fast casual, I guess. So like Red Lobster or that type of, you know, food, Applebee's. So we didn't. So it wasn't a food city by any means. So if you were able to make a weekend to go to Dallas, that was like a big deal. So now, you know, when I got a couple dollars to be able to travel to the big foodie cities, I would make a point to try to go and not do the whole meal, right? I couldn't afford a tasting meal. Hell, I still can't afford a tasting meal. But, you know, you have maybe an appetizer at one restaurant, a dessert somewhere else, you know, entree somewhere else, and then you can experience a lot of different cuisines and techniques and still, you know, at affordable price.
I mean, I remember taking my then girlfriend to Charlie Trotter's for dinner for her birthday.
Wow.
And it was the first expensive thing I've ever done in my life. And as I was walking out the door after we paid, the general manager or somebody came running after me and said, "Sir, you forgot to tip." And I was like, "No, it was $200 or $300, whatever it was." And he goes, "Yeah, but you tip." I I didn't know
Know
that
that.
it could possibly be that expensive that you also, that I just was like, but the $200 was the crazy part. What do you mean I got to leave more? Like, I'm still
Yeah.
sweating just from signing it, you know?
No, that's a good lesson, right? Now we're like on the other end of that. You better leave a tip, take care
Oh
of your
yeah,
people.
definitely, definitely.
Totally. Um, no, that is that, and you know what, those stories, I totally hear you, and New York City is great because there's lots of different kinds of restaurants and not only one kind of restaurant, I think.
Mhm.
Switching gears a little bit, culinary schools are changing. They're changing with the times. FCI doesn't even exist anymore. It's been kind of folded into the Institute for Culinary Education. There's a lot of classes that are now, there's things that are available for lay people, for people that don't necessarily want to be chefs or go into the industry. They're just, amateur sort of classes. What do you think is an important thing for a culinary school? Do you think like internship, externship is the most important? Do you think that the network of those chefs and the culinary folks, do you think that's a more important part? Do you think there's something particular in cuisine today? Is there an emphasis on, I mean, there's always an emphasis on knife skills, but do you think that, a diversity of ingredients and learning different kinds of food and culture is important? What do you think are some really important parts of choosing the best culinary school for you? Or maybe not for you personally, but for someone who's looking into school?
I would say check out the staff. What is the staff made of? Who are those chefs? Because those are the people writing the curriculum more than likely, and they're the ones doing the demonstrations and really forming your education. So let's just say you're in my position where the only school is a state school, or it's not a big Kendall College or Le Cordon Bleu. So who are the instructors? What can you get for the money and the location that you're at? Then money, right? Let's say you can go anywhere in the world, and how can you get the most bang for your buck? You don't want to come out having spent all this money and not have a solid education. So what about you, Greg? What do you think?
I mean, a lot of that stuff, I don't know what's good or bad. I came from my loving parents. We tried to have meals around the table and whatnot, but like I don't have a big food culture, a part of my upbringing, and I came from a mostly white suburb of Chicago. So like going into culinary school, like you have no reference point. So to me, okay, French food is fancy. So okay, if I want to be good, I'm supposed to do French food. Like that was how I was making that association. That's what's in fancy places is French food. Okay, so there's a lot of French people here. So in culinary school, someone told me that if you stand out, they'll send you to France. Okay, so French just kept becoming this, like, that's where I had to keep learning, keep developing those skills, keep learning the foundation of French. And then once I went to France, like then all of a sudden I was really moving into Chicago. That was like one new experience for me that started to open my eyes that things are different. And then like moving to France, where like the chef is calling me a stupid American because I don't finish my plate of food, and I'm like, why do you put all that food on your plate if you don't finish it? It doesn't make sense. Like, but so all of those things started to just sort of feed into who I am as a human being. Like I've really evolved as a person through food. Not to sound like kind of as a cheesy talking point, but once I did my 6-month internship in France, I was like, okay, well, I just don't know anything. I mean, that was the first time I was on a plane, was when I went to France for my internship.
Wow.
And then 2 years later or 4 years later, after working with at Alenia and all these fancy people and meeting all these, my network becoming a little bit bigger, my knowledge becoming a little bit broader. Like then it was like, okay, everybody's in Spain. The cool stuff is Spain. I have to get to Spain. So then I I did whatever I had to do to get a job in a restaurant in Spain, even though, it's like, it was kind of illegal. But in that environment, I lived in a 3-bedroom apartment that had 3 sets of bunk beds in each one of those rooms, and not one of us was from the same country. And so that in itself just, okay, now once again, I don't know anything. This guy's president is a dictator. But this guy's gay, and if he goes home, he's gonna get killed. This, like, I don't know. That's how, and then all those things you just like kind of reassess after you stepped away from those environments, and it's just, for me, it's just been, how do I do that more? Like, so that's why I would, even though I had these 2 restaurants, I did it again, where I went to Japan in Hong Kong for a month, and slept in like a tiny little Airbnb, like just to, okay, I don't know that part of the world. I don't know anything. It can help influence what I do in my career and in my food. So I've just been building momentum since that first sort of like eating sauteed mushrooms in culinary school. When I first got to culinary school, like, I only had breaded fried mushrooms before that, and I don't know. I just really like the industry. I really like what I do for a living. So, it's fun. It's just like, there's just so many reasons to like what we do, Okay, it's, last year was a terrible year for me, but for 100 reasons. But, there's just so much to do in this industry. You could get sick of cooking, and you can just start learning how to make bread. And you can, like, once you start to, once you get in it, it becomes very addicting. Like, I can't see myself doing anything else now.
I think there's a lot of people that feel that way once they get into it. It's like you're in it. Now you can't get out. And it's so very clear that you enjoy what you're doing. I mean, Olmsted and Maison Yaki, Olmsted especially, has it's such good food, but it's still so much fun. It's still such a fun place to be, and you have the rooms in the backyard, and it really is so clear that you enjoy what you're doing. One of the questions that's come in from our audience is, in hiring a new chef, or really in hiring anyone, in either of your worlds, what is it that you are looking for? Are you looking for someone that can peel 100 potatoes in 2.5 minutes? Are you looking for someone who gets to their interview on time, but maybe doesn't have any other experience? Like, what are some things that you are really keyed into seeing when you're hiring somebody new?
I think it's both and all of what you just said, Victoria. It's, are you going to be on time? Are you going to come every single day? Do you take direction? Are you willing to learn? Do you have a foundation? That's ideal, right? Unfortunately, right now in the industry, and has been for several years, it's, will you show up and continue to show up? Because I think it's, as we've talked about and everybody's heard about, especially with the pandemic putting it under a microscope, people in food service, we don't really make a living wage. So if you're not, if you're paying only $8 an hour, and these people are not able to make rent, or, even get to work on the bus or the train or get gas in the car, then they're not going to show up if they can get another gig somewhere else and make more money. So that aside, are they going to come? Are they going to come every day? Are they going to come on time? That's like huge. And then, do they want to be trained? Are they in this because they love the food, they're passionate about it, or is it just a job? And again, neither are a wrong answer. It's just, that's how you kind of approach that employee. You still grow and mentor and train them, but then, maybe you take a moment and look and see, is this person the person I want to put on the line? Are they going to really give back to the business? Or are they really going to grow as a chef? So in hiring, you have to look at all of those things. And it's not just, who's going to want to come and put their dish on the menu. It's like, who's going to come in and do the hard work and listen and learn and be of benefit.
Yeah. It's hard, some of it is just get them in and let's see, unfortunately. And, we've tried all different things of going with very, very few cooks and paying well. And so it's like, okay, I could pay you well, but it's going to be more work than you're going to snap at some point. There's going to be a breaking point to, you know, kind of going meeting in the middle. You know, that's sort of where we're at now. But you know, I'm sure it's just, I mean, I know that if I talk to a friend in Dubai, or if I talk to, you know, someone in Chicago, that staffing is just unequivocally the hardest part of owning a restaurant. And it's because of, again, what Jennifer just said, it's like, it's, you know, it's just uncomfortable. It's you have to, like, we pay, our minimum wage is I don't even know if it is quite yet 15, but that's what our minimum wage is here anyway, and that's still putting a dent in New York City. I mean, that's still barely, that doesn't make it a livable wage in New York. I'm sure it does in other parts of the country, but so a lot of it has just been, you know, a lot of it is just giving whoever is the most hungry, whoever has the biggest appetite. One of our strongest cooks across the street, he was on he was scooping mac and cheese from a food truck before us, but now he's been with us for over a year, and he's one of our strongest guys. You know, you know, I haven't met one person, whether it's my friend that's the chef of Per Se, or, you know, a friend in Norway, like just everyone is going through that same process. It's whether or not it's Danny Meyer and he's able to do some partial inclusion in their insurance or something like that. The hiring process is tough. I mean, I only recently reflected on, you know, this restaurant's about to be 5 years old, and I don't know why, but I just always live in this world where this mindset of, like, you know, it's falling apart. How do I keep it together? And it dawned on me that about 7 of my 7 key people have all been with me for 4.5 years, almost 5 years. Mm-hmm. And, you know, that, I have to say, that helped me get through that week, in that, like, it just made me feel better about myself, and that, you know, not, yeah, but maybe you know, I'm not always A plus, but at least, you know, there's something about being a part of this and what we're trying to do that makes it worth putting up with me, I guess.
I'm sure there's many things to make it worth it, Chef. I would love to, and, you know, one of the other questions that came in, and we sort of just touched on it, was that, you know, could you discuss the living wage in the restaurant industry? We were warned about it while in school, but the wage is beyond humility and very tough. And I think that it's tough. It's been that way. I mean, it was, you know, in the 15 years since I graduated from school, my first job out of school, I was hired at a restaurant in New York City to make hummus and tzatziki and some other Mediterranean spreads. And I was working for $9.25 an hour. And the cap of the hours I could get paid was 40 hours. And I consistently was working 60 to 70. And it was normal. That was just how it was. And that's what you did. And I was working for some guys that had worked at Per Se, and they were running this kitchen of a Mediterranean restaurant, and I was learning a lot. It was the first time I'd ever seen beet dust. They were powdered dusts for a while that we were doing dusts. And I was like, you're putting beet dust on a plate. I was just amazed, and it was worth it. But I went home after using these pristine ingredients all day, and I was making, you know, cup of noodles in my apartment, because that's what it was, until, you know, you save up enough money to go to that blowout dinner because you really want to experience that. And I think that's like the give and take of lots of cooks. It's like butter sandwiches with hot sauce until you go out to like that Per Se night, or that La Grenouille night, or that night where you're really experiencing something. And I think you really do need to have a love of this industry to get through those years, to push through to the next thing a lot of times. We have about 12 minutes left. I know one thing that we didn't quite touch on here is your work as an author, Jen, and I would love to talk a little bit more about, I'm personally familiar with Field Peas and Foie Gras, but I know that that's not your only book. Could you tell us a little bit more about how you got into the cookbook writing, authoring sort of world, and was that, I'm sure Culinary School helped with that, but, you know, how did you kind of break into that part of the industry?
Yeah, sure. So it's not as altruistic as you say. It was very ego driven. I live in the South, and Southern food, soul food, Black food gets a really bad rap, right? It's like, oh, it's all grease and gravy. You guys don't eat healthy. Your food's not pretty. And I was like, no, our food is healthy, it's fresh, we eat seasonally, we set a beautiful table, all of those things. And so that's what inspired me to write Field Piece to Foie Gras, Southern recipes with a French accent. And these are recipes I grew up eating. Some I wrote, some that had kind of that French aesthetic or French ingredients like tarragon or thyme or Dijon mustard, and lots of beautiful pictures and stories. So that was the first one. The second book is a book that mimics how I cook in my real life. And the working title was Cook Once, Eat Twice. And the publisher hated it. No one's going to eat leftovers. Nobody likes old food. Nobody's going to buy that book, which in hindsight, right? Now everybody's trying to do that. So we called it Dinner Deja Vu, Southern Tonight, French Tomorrow. And it's one set of ingredients, and you have a dish that has a Southern theme to it, say roasted or chicken pot pie, that you use the leftover meat and carcass for the stock of your roasted chicken with lemon and rosemary. So just one set of ingredients, two different dishes. And that was to mimic how I cook, but also to let people know that you can use everything in your kitchen, run a full use kitchen. And so that I wasn't a one-hit wonder, right? Like, oh, she wrote that one book. You remember that one? So at least I have two cookbooks. And so then I found that I just really enjoyed sharing the recipes. It really spoke to the home cook of people that I've realized are really anxious, nervous cooks in the kitchen. Like people like you, Victoria, who really love to cook at home, and that inspired you to go to culinary school. Most people are not that. And so I feel like the books help them calm down, get organized, teaches them a little bit more of the culinary language, and shares with them, how to cook for your family and not go broke. So those are why I wrote those two. I have written a couple what I call cookbook journals, and they're really just journals with recipe prompts, so that people can start writing their own recipes or saving their family favorites and just have that history and that heirloom.
That's great. They're wonderful books, actually.
Yeah.
And I think we featured, I think when we first met, it was, you were featuring your book, Field Piece to Foie Gras, and it was really wonderful to have you at the Beard House for that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a good book. It's fun. I still enjoy it. It's a lot of work to write a book, and I'll tell people, because I was writing it while working. So that means I was writing it at 2, 3 a.m., because that's the only other time I had. So those of you that are interested, write the book. Just know it takes a long time. Test all your recipes, send them to friends. They'll make it for free. And don't expect to get wealthy on a cookbook. I look at my cookbooks as just giant business cards, right? So that you can kind of make that introduction of yourself and your style of food.
That's funny. Awesome. I think question just regarding where can your books be purchased? Are they on your website? Are they on Amazon? Yeah.
Yeah, both. So yeah, Amazon carries both, or actually all three, because it's included in the cookbook journal. And then my website, chefjenniferhillbooker.com. It has the books as well as the spices.
Awesome. So we have another question from our audience, which I'm just reading now. And this might be a good place for us to kind of wrap things up. And I'll just read it. It's a little bit longer, so I'll just read it here. I'm in culinary school in NYC right now, lost my stable salaried bonus job in hospitality in March 2020, took this risk because I know I'm meant to work in the food space and social impact, but it's definitely scary during the pandemic to see the light at the end of the tunnel and future opportunities. What advice do you have for someone starting out right now in the turmoil of this all? Would you, hold on, on the turmoil of this all, would you be approaching the industry the same way you had earlier in your career? Would we do anything differently? So not necessarily maybe a culinary school specific question, although this individual is in school right now. But is there something that you would suggest or anything that you would recommend that might be different about this particular time? Should people be prepared to have lots of options for work, very few options for work? Should you still be looking around for your perfect job? Should you take something in an entry-level kitchen just to get started? Any advice in the now that you might give?
I went to culinary school with the mindset of I'm going to be a chef, and in my mind, the chef was someone who worked the hotline and then own a restaurant, right? So I think that was then, and that was how we ate traditionally. You know, you have your restaurant, you try to turn the table 3 times, and that was it. I think now, and this is because of the pandemic and then because of my experience just personally, be open to work different jobs under that food service culinary umbrella, right? You don't have to work the hotline. You should. It gives you a perspective you're not going to get anywhere else in food service. But also think about research and development or food styling. You can give some thought to writing a cookbook or a recipe for other people. I've done that before as well. So just kind of look at what's in culinary, and you probably will have to cobble together a job that pays all your bills, right? So maybe you do work in the restaurant of your dreams, like Greg, for free for 6 months, or perhaps you work somewhere that you really do enjoy and you're learning a lot and you're making enough money that your second job is perhaps writing articles or doing some food styling. So look and see the future of what culinary is, which I think is not just traditional dining. It's more classes. I think it's grab and go. I think it's some specialty grocery stores. So just kind of see the future and not right this second.
Greg, any thoughts?
I mean, I would say work backwards. What is the end game? And start working. If it's to be the owner of a fancy chef or of a fancy restaurant and be the chef owner of that, then you have to. Okay, so you have to. There are very just clear steps that you take to get to that path. Now, I would say more than ever that there are. I very blindly did things a very specific way. This was a famous restaurant that was very fancy in Chicago. Now everyone's talking about Spain, so I have to go to Spain. Okay, so now the French Laundry and Thomas Keller, he's our god in culinary in the U.S., so I have to work for him now. Sustainability, so my things were all very strategic. I don't think you have to be as blind as maybe I approached my career. I think that you could, I know plenty of people that own restaurants that didn't take that dedicated of a path, But I would just work backwards and what is the gist of what you want your life to look like, and no matter what, that starting place it's not gonna be you standing at the paths kind of pointing your finger at what you want to be done. I mean, the industry is changing a lot of it is for the better. A lot of this illuminating stuff is for the better. I have a hard time mentoring or just telling people that they should do what I did. I'm working on a cookbook. I have stuff that I'm trying to get into Whole Foods. I have multiple restaurants in the works. My path worked out for me, but that's because I could take that type of environment, and I don't know if that was the most healthy environment to put myself through for 12 years straight. And so just me trying to my own cooks, mac and cheese truck guy. I have sometimes a hard time just explaining to him, how he should approach his career, because I'm sure others have done it. Others are just more successful and have done it on a different path. So I feel like I can really only speak to my own, and that did working for free for 4 or 6 months at multiple restaurants throughout my career and going into debt and letting it being okay getting divorced and all this, it ended up sort of where I wanted to get to. But it's hopefully someone else can do it better than I did it. So I'm sure.
Yeah, and
it
I
has
don't,
to be.
yeah, I don't know if it's any better. I think it's just different. I know for, you know, a woman, we're still expected to kind of be the homemaker. We have to have the kids still. But, you know, if you want to be in culinary, you have to kind of do more of a circular path. It's not a linear path like you have, Greg, which I really did want. Like that was my vision. But I also wanted to be a wife and a mom, you know, and all these things. So we can still get to that end point, but it just may be, you know, different routes.
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, COVID didn't make restaurants any more like, you know, the average restaurant, if you just use some loose numbers, if the average restaurant makes $1 million that year, 10% is a good margin for an average restaurant. That's $100,000. That is something that you're split. That's something you're paying off all the debt with the bank, your partners. There isn't some entity that is stealing from the underpaid cooks or, you know, or the dishwasher. Nobody, the money is just not there. It's just not there, you know, and you know, so it's frustrating for everyone because I don't want to be the asshole that doesn't offer insurance, you know. I want to approve as many overtime hours as I can, and it would be this way even if there wasn't a pandemic, you know.
Yeah, that's true.
Hopefully some creatives will come up with some interesting ways to pivot the business. You know, I'm just a cook. I just know how to tornado potatoes. Like, so I'm not going to be able to change the world, but somebody.
Well, I think that cooks can definitely change the world, and James Beard Foundation is all about that. So, you know, this year has been unimaginably wild. I'm really glad to be getting to the end of that pandemic year. I am sad, though, to be getting to the end of this webinar because it's been really, really wonderful chatting with both of you, but we are at time right now. So I think with this, I want to thank our panelists today. Jennifer Hill Booker, thank you for joining us from Atlanta, Georgia. Greg Baxtrom, thank you for joining us from Brooklyn, New York. I'm Victoria Jordan Rodriguez, joining you here from Jersey City, New Jersey. On behalf of the James Beard Foundation, our partners, Kendall College, just thank you for joining us. Thanks to all of our viewers who joined us today. As I mentioned at the top of the webinar, this will be archived by next week, so you'll be able to check out this and all the rest of our webinars, which are incredible amount of information that we've been able to pull together at any time. There, you can archive, or you can download that archive. Thank you again, all of you, for joining us. We will see you again next time, and with that, I bid you a bon appetit, whatever your next meal will be. Have a great day, everyone.
Nice talking to you guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care.